Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. I'm your host, Tom Schwab, and today we're diving into a topic that I know will resonate with so many of you. It's how can I better track the impact of every podcast appearance? If you've ever felt frustrated by the mystery of podcast return on investment, wondering if your interviews are truly moving the needle for your business, then this episode is for you. My guest today is Jessica Morgan. She's a true expert in refining podcast strategies to drive real business results. Together, we'll unpack why bigger isn't always better when it comes to audience size and how focusing on the right metrics like podcast authority, social media engagement, and long-term brand growth can transform your podcast guesting into a powerful marketing engine. We'll also talk about the podcast authority score. It's a new tool we use to help measure not just the reach of your podcast appearance, but their actual business impact. Jessica will share some practical tips on setting smart goals, tracking data, and avoiding the vanity metrics that can lead you astray. So grab a notepad, settle in, and get ready for insights that could change the way you approach every podcast interview moving forward. Let's get started. Today, you get to sit in on a conversation that we have often in our company, right? With our clients, within the team. It's all about how do you get more impact from every podcast, and how do you gauge that? How do you track that? Today, I'm sitting down with our operations manager, Jessica Morgan. We're going to talk about how to better track the impact of each and every podcast appearance. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as we talk about impact, right? How do I measure the impact? How do I measure the results? What's the first thing that really comes to your mind on that?
The first thing that comes to my mind is ensuring that you have a clear set of goals. What is impact to you? What does success mean to you? Because success to someone doing a book launch is very different than success for someone who's just trying to grow their authority in the space or their thought leadership. And so making sure that we have a clear set of goals is really the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I ask on the discovery calls, and we ask on the kickoff calls, right? Why do you want to do podcast interviews? Podcast interviews could be an ego thing or a hobby thing. That's not why people come to us. They've got a goal they're trying to reach. And we've really, over the last decade, broken them down into more or less, 9 different goals on that. You want to start going through those?
Sure. Yeah. 9 different categories is kind of what we see most typically. Main thing is one of the top ones I would say is brand differentiation. A lot of people, we can think of it like category design. A lot of people come to us saying, I want to create a new sector in my brand. I want to differentiate my brand and how I do it differently. And the long form content is key for that, to just really explain and gain that know, like, trust in your vertical.
Yeah. Because if you come onto a podcast and you're like, I'm a full service digital marketing agency that helps businesses, that tells me nothing, right? You've got to differentiate it. The riches are in the niches, and it's hard to do that in a little post, right? You've got to tell your brand story. You've got to tell what makes you different.
Exactly. We also see thought leadership. We have a lot of universities that come to us, just looking to really just gain that thought leadership. A lot of different people in that area, but just establishing themselves as a thought leader in their different departments or whatever it is, to just really make sure that they're gaining themselves that notoriety and such.
That's always interesting because, Georgia Tech, University of North Carolina, working with them, and it's just interesting that brand authority or thought leadership on social media for them can be more powerful than peer-reviewed professors, right? You think about it, Professor G, Scott Galloway, everybody knows him, right? And every student wants to be in his class. They don't know what journals he's published in, what he got his PhD in. They just know him from online. So that idea of that thought leadership, people have to get to know you. And it's a great, easy way for your ideal customers to start to get to know you.
Absolutely. We also have the SEO or LMO, some people have been calling it, the AI, using that to increase your authority in that specific vertical as well. And so we definitely have had some clients, I'll let you talk about Mickey and stuff, who have used SEO to further their brand.
Yeah, because most of the time people say, I want to talk to my ideal customer, all right, or my ideal client. You can definitely do that, but don't forget, other people are listening too, right? The search engines are listening. The AI engines are listening, right? ChatGPT will show you the sources, and largely they're long form collaborative content. And you mentioned Mickey Kennedy over e-releases. I was speaking in Baltimore and he introduced me and he told the story that I hadn't heard. He had been working with an SEO agency for years and years. And they said, you will never rank for press releases, right? It's just too competitive of a term. Well, a couple of years after doing podcast interviews, they're like, oh, you started to rank for these terms and these long tail terms. And it was all because Mickey talks about press releases and how his ideal clients use them. And the search engines aren't just looking at keywords anymore. They're looking at everything. And, it wasn't overnight, but he started ranking higher and higher and now on AI.
Absolutely. A lot of people will come to us sometimes to kind of start a podcast and grow their podcast following. I know Christopher Lockhead, Follow Your Different. He is a really good example of that, coming to us to say, hey, I want to, increase the followers of my podcast. We've had a couple other ones as well that I can think of too.
Yeah. And sometimes we'll even do that. Sometimes we'll call it phase 0, right? Somebody is launching a podcast, and to launch a podcast takes about a quarter, right? By the time you get everything set up, recorded, out there on iTunes, right? Anybody that says, you buy the course that says launch a podcast this weekend, it's not going to be a podcast that you're proud of. So what they will do is what they call it phase 0. In that 90 days while they're doing the initial launching of their podcast, they're going around to other podcasts and starting to talk about their expertise, their podcast, right? And as Cliff Ravenscraft, who used to be known as the podcast answer man, this was probably 2015. I remember him standing up at a conference and saying, the best place to find podcast listeners is listening to podcasts. It was true then. It is true now, right? Paying Facebook ads will not get somebody to a podcast, but if they hear you on one podcast, it's very easy for them to go through and just subscribe to your podcast too. So yeah, we've had a lot of clients that say the goal of podcast guesting is to launch my podcast.
Absolutely. We also get a lot of book launches. One that I can think of is specifically is Peter Mutabazi. He has a foundation called Now I Am Known, and he came to us, which was such a fun campaign because it was so different than what we normally do. But his foundation is for helping. He fosters children and helping kind of get his story known and his foundation known. And I know I'm sure he sold a lot of books. I know I personally bought one. But on top of that, he also received a donation of $10,000 towards his foundation from a podcast host who just loved what he was doing. And so launching that book and just being able to go on podcasts furthered anything he had ever imagined about what success he would see with that.
That's interesting. You mentioned, what goal they're going after, but you mentioned like there with Peter, right? He came and said, I want to launch my book. This is just a book launch. And usually there's a primary goal and then secondary goals, right? If you can hit all 9 goals or the categories, man, you will get amazing value from it. But if you just find a couple of them, right? Whatever it is, the brand authority, the AI making ChatGPT your best referral source, the book launch, you get 2 or 3 of those, and that's how you drive results.
Absolutely. Another one, probably with the 6th category, I would say, is speaking. They want speaking opportunities. And so it's funny that you mentioned that first goal and second goal, because I can think of who I know we've talked about on here before, but is Juliana. And she came for, I want, more leads. I want to, get more brand exposure. But then she got a huge speaking opportunity from it as well. So that was her, not a primary goal, might not have even been in her realm of thoughts, but that is something that came from podcasting as well. And I know we have other speakers and such too.
Yeah, like Tim Sanders, great example there. Tim has written a lot of great books. Last one we did with him was Deal Storm, right? He makes a couple bucks on the books, right? But he's also charging, I don't even know what he's charging now. It's probably $30,000 to $50,000 a keynote, right? So the book launch is really to launch the speaking launch.
We also have a lot of people that come to us about content. I want content for, as much content as I can get. I'm going to do podcast interviews because I love it. I enjoy speaking, but really the main goal for me is to increase that content. I can take one podcast interview and create 20 pieces of content and utilize that throughout the whole entire year. So that's a big thing as well.
Yeah. And I think of, there's an agency, that came to us, and pre-COVID, they would send out a video team and to get the B-roll footage and everything. They can't do it now because everybody's remote. So what they came looking for is, can we get our clients out on 10 podcasts? Because we're going to slice and dice the heck out of that and make all of that content. It's an easy way to do it. And I always tell people, you make as much content in a day as Gary Vaynerchuk does. The only difference is he's got people capturing it and then repurposing it.
Also, leads that close faster. I mean, isn't that everybody's number one goal that they would want? But leads that are, you're in front of your primary audience, your people. You're not, that's where we always say bigger isn't always better. Being in front of the right people becomes, I think you say, Tom, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. When you're in front of the right people, it becomes easy. And so I know we have a client, Paul, Paul McManus. He has such a niche. He's like, I want to go after financial advisors. And we were like, okay, that's a very niche podcast, but let's go for it. And I know in the first couple that went live, he closed some huge deals just from those super niche podcasts that a lot of people would say, that's not worth my time. It's a really small podcast. But in the realm of it, that was his ideal audience, was right in that room. And it may be a smaller podcast compared to, like you mentioned, Prof G, and that's not his area at all, but a big podcast like that doesn't have his ideal audience. But right here, he had leads that close faster just from being in front of the right audience.
Yeah. And it's one of these things where we talk about your marketing should be magnetic, right? And everybody's like, yeah, bring more clients, bring more leads. It's like, no, that's not how a magnet works. It brings the right people and repels the rest, right? After somebody listens to you for 30 or 45 minutes, they've turned you up or turned you off. So when they show up, that's a hot lead, right? And we've worked with B2B SaaS companies that have actually shown us the data that clients that come through the podcast interview marketing channel close faster for a higher initial amount and have less churn. So let's talk about the last one of the 9.
Grow following. I feel like that's what everybody wants to do. Jim Shields is a great example of that. One of our clients who came to us for, I want to talk about my book. I want to talk about my own podcast. I want to talk about my business. And ultimately through all of those avenues, he was able to grow his following significantly with that as well. And so, and I know you have a good relationship with Jim, so you probably have more details into that as well.
Yeah. And Jim he's a great practitioner, right? There's some people that come and say, I want to be a celebrity, an influencer, all the rest of that. I don't know. That's not our ideal person that we work with, right? It's not about ego that I just want to be famous, but Jim realizes that the more people that know about him, right? The wider the orbit that he's known in, the more opportunity it brings. So it's like one of those where growing your following, that's sort of a spin-off of everything. And it's that flywheel effect that keeps things going with there. And really, it's like, how can you get more authority in the market? Because that's, really what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that sometimes people think about podcasting and they're kind of looking at those vanity metrics of I want to go on Joe Rogan. I want to go on the huge podcast because I want a million people to hear me. Where we kind of say, hold on, let's go back a little bit. And we need to think more about the business metrics, right? You want downloads are great, but you want leads and sales and leads that close faster, deals that close faster versus just the vanity metrics of I want to speak in front of 10,000 people. And so kind of reframing your thought as far as better tracking the impact is thinking about the metrics that matter the most. And so I am super excited because we are currently working with a leading AI company that is coming out. We're coming out with a podcast authority score. And so that is something that we're working close hand in hand with them to ensure that we are kind of fixing this area in the industry. And so what we're going to be doing is looking at all, each podcast, all these different metrics and such, being very transparent, because I feel like a lot of times it's, this is the data, but we are not going to tell you how we got the data. But then also looking at it as a whole, but then in their own niche as well. So it's hard for people to give like an engagement or an authority score to Joe Rogan, and then you also have like the financial advisor masterclass right here. Well, they're not even in the same realm, but the financial advisor masterclass may have super high podcast authority in its niche. And so we're super excited to be able to start that. And then the next iteration that we're excited to start is having its own personalized podcast authority. So if your goal, like Paul, is talking in front of financial advisors, well, the podcast authority score for financial advisor masterclass is going to be 100 or high. Joe Rogan, probably a 20. It's one of those things where that's not going to benefit you for your guest profile, your guest authority, previous guests, all of that. And so that is something I am so excited that we are working on this year.
And it's long overdue. You figure, podcasting, 20 years old here. And because it's so fragmented, there's not good data, right? We license all these different databases. They all tell us a different piece in the puzzle, but there's no score that everybody agrees on, right? There's some out there where, every podcast is in the top 10%, right? Was it like Lake Wobegon where all the kids are above average or something? It's a meaningless number. And in other areas like websites, right? We know there's just something called a domain authority. Is this a good website? Is it a bad website? Well, what's the domain authority and compared to what? Right? Like you said, financial advisors there. Is this a good website for financial advisors? Well, it's not as big as Wikipedia, right? But, this is the number one for that. So really trying to come up with that, and we're really excited on this partnership and to roll that out. I really think it's going to take the conversation from vanity metrics and, dare I say, inflated metrics, right? We ask a podcaster's downloads, right? It's like asking a woman her weight or a guy how much he can bench press, right? First of all, it's rude. And secondly, they may exaggerate or something, right? I always tell people I can bench press 350. You were thinking pounds. I was thinking grams, right? And so sometimes people will say, I get millions of downloads. Well, yeah, if your podcast has been around 10 years, you might have gotten 1 million downloads. Doesn't mean when you get on that podcast that you're going to get heard by 1 million people.
And I think that melds right pretty well into another thing that I know we wanted to touch on is the other media channels. So we have so many people that come to us and they're like, I have done 5 podcast recordings and I haven't seen a single thing move in my welcome pages, my accounts or anything, or my sales or leads or conversion, anything. And we're like, well, they haven't gone live yet. And so it's one of those things where thinking about it's more of a marathon, not a sprint, or it's not going to, you record, it hasn't even gone live yet. And you're going to all of a sudden see all this business. And so that is definitely a difference between podcasting and other media channels, like possibly Facebook ads or radio interviews and all of that.
Yeah. And so I always tell people podcasts are more like print media than radio or television. Right. Today, if I was invited to be on Men's Health, right, let's get really fictitious here, right? It's not going to be for next month's issue, right? They're already planning for an issue 6 months out. So that's what they're doing there. And so we just did our state of podcast guesting report, and it showed that the mean time, that means half of them are above this and half of them are below it. But the mean time from reaching out to a podcast to them scheduling it, recording it, and airing it is 83 days, right? So it's not like you're going to start today and you're going to get the results tomorrow. But unlike you said, like a radio, right? If you're on the radio, everybody hears you today. Well, everybody that's listening, but if they weren't listening right now at this time, they'll never hear you. So the podcasts are more long form, evergreen, right? People will hear you for a long time with that. And the search engines are going to be indexing that also.
They're always listening. I think another thing too is thinking about we've kind of talked a bit about quantitative, but the qualitative impact as well. So, we've talked all the time about welcome pages and how to better track that, the data and the analytics on that by having that dedicated page that the listeners are going to, and it is evergreen. So it'll be there forever. And, listeners can constantly go there. So that is a huge qualitative one. Do you have anything to add on welcome pages?
Yeah, that whole idea of qualitative and quantitative, right? So much in marketing now is this perfect attribution that Google tells me, my numbers, Facebook tells me my numbers, so everybody should. Well, the thing is that most marketing has never been like that, right? And I would even argue that Google and Facebook are stealing attribution from other people, right? Rand Fishkin, great example that he talks about, right? If Rand is talking at an event, right? And somebody's like, oh, I want to work with him and Spark Toro. They go to the website and they put his name in and they misspell it, right? Well, Google is going to take him to his website and they're going to say, we brought you all of that traffic. Is that true? Well, they assisted on that, right? And then what if somebody is just about ready to sign up and they get distracted, right? And with Facebook retargeting, they bring them back. Facebook's going to say, we brought you that deal. Well, they helped in it, right? So, but they're going to say it's all us. Google will say it's all them, but it wouldn't have happened if he wasn't out there speaking. So if you got to have the data that says, I need this quote unquote perfect attribution that Google and Facebook give me, then you should stop doing a lot of things, right? You should never go to networking events because you can't attribute that. Billboards are out. Sponsoring events, that's out. Little league teams, right? I don't know if you can get the quantitative from that, but qualitative, if you're selling to a small community, right? It's a great way, right? To be out there. So there's different things on that. And I think, we've got to remember sort of that the qualitative, right? I know in my heart that this was a great conversation. The host got it. The audience will get it, right? I know that this is going to work. And then you see the quantitative afterwards.
Exactly. Well, and you also get that social proof. I know a lot of people have a media page or an in the media page on their website, or they might add the featured on their one sheets that we provide about different, places that they've spoke, different podcasts they've been on. You can add that to your emails, your emailing list, all of that. So there's a lot of social proof there as well. Media invitations, partnerships, brand mentions, networking. There's so much qualitative helping to kind of add to that impact of your podcast appearances as well.
Yeah. And most people aren't doing closed loop marketing, right? And if you've got a big SaaS company, maybe if you're B2C high volume, maybe you do closed loop, but it's basically the proper way to do it is every time you get a sale, you should track it back to where they came from, so that you know what's working and what isn't. Because if you just said, and here's a prime example. Years ago, we have tested a lot of things, right? And we tested cold outreach. I'm embarrassed to say we did, but we did cold outreach. And you know what? The salespeople said it was working, right? Because they got lots of sales calls from it. They were really busy. But then when we actually looked at it, there was a lot of calls, but people never closed, right? So was it successful? If you look by the number of leads, it was incredibly successful. By the amount of engagement and the list, it was incredibly successful, but it didn't turn into profitable clients. So unless you do that, you're measuring the wrong thing, right? You're optimizing for activity, not for sales, right? And we had a client, Ari Galper. I will never see a sales funnel the same way. He talks about don't have a sales funnel, right? You don't want to have 1,000 people you've got to work in order to get 10 sales, right? That works for low ticket items, highly automated, but for our clients, right? They want more of a sales cylinder. If I need 3 new clients this month, I want to have conversations with 4 great people and have that 3 out of 4 conversion rates there. So that whole thing of what are you optimizing for?
And I know we also talk about the lifetime value of a lead, right? And like you had said, where you're getting better leads that close faster. So you already have those ideal clients they've listened to you, they agree with you. They're like, that's exactly what I need. You are the preparation H, as you say, Tom, to my problem. I'm going to get on that call and I already know I'm ready. I'm in. And that lifetime value of that lead, and it could be a high ticket client, it can make that whole podcast worth it. It can make your whole campaign worth it. I know we've had clients who are like, that one client paid for my whole entire campaign and I'm ready to go. Let's go for round 2.
Bill Troy talks about this, and we've got an interview with him coming up also. Bill Troy is the first one that pretty much said the emperor has no clothes in digital marketing, right? He wrote a great book called Clicksand, How Digital Marketing is Ruining Your Business. And he pointed out that what works for small transactions doesn't scale up. And that's why you see, if you're just trying to sell, a $9 widget, you can do that off of Facebook ads and master classes or challenges. But all of a sudden people are like, and we're going to ramp that up to high ticket sales. No, it doesn't work. It's a different thing, right? The best lawyer, cardiac surgeon, that person that you're going to trust your life to, your family's life to, right? That's a trust thing, not because you saw them on a Facebook ad or a challenge or something like that. And it's the same way in business too, right? Greg Alexander talks about products are sold, services are bought.
Well, and I think all the listeners are probably like, that's all wonderful, but can you give me some practical tracking strategies? I want to be able to do this and to make sure that I am, tracking the impact of my podcast appearances in the best way possible. And so I think that goes right back to first what we talked about. What is your goal? Are we setting smart goals for your podcast appearances?
And I was going to say, I'm going to challenge you. I use that term all the time. What's it? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound, or something like that.
Yeah, right. Is it realistic or relatable? One of the two, and then time bound. Yep.
Yeah, and it's this idea of if it's just I want to grow, I want to be known. Well, that's a wish, that's a hope, that's not a goal, right? So that's one of the things we start with, right? Of what does a campaign look like? What are your goals for the campaign? Because that way we know if we're on track, we're behind track. And we can also say, that goal is going to take you 18 months, right? SEO is not an overnight thing, right? Sometimes people will say, well, how many podcasts does it take? I don't know, right? How many television appearances does it take in order to become famous, right? If you start with Oprah, maybe one, right? But chances are there's a pathway to it, right? You gotta start off Broadway before you go on Broadway, but make sure you know where you're going, because if not, so many podcasts are like this too. They don't know why they're starting. So when it gets a little bit tough and just about the time they were supposed to get, or they would have gotten results, they give up too soon. So start with the end in mind. And it's something that we always ask our clients, because we know nobody just wants a podcast interview.
Exactly. And we can't hit a moving target. So having those clear goals and always being able to relate back to those is great. And I know you always say hope is not a strategy. And so I always try to train myself not to say, well, I hope we can do that. So hope is not a strategy. I believe we can do that.
Well, and it's also the other Thomism that we talk around here is that in God we trust, everyone else bring data. So if you're just like, I feel it's not working, and I can, we've had this with clients before, and they're like, early on, it's like, can I try it for a month or two? No, you will not see any results from podcast interview marketing in a month or two. So if you're doing that, you're making decisions without data, right? So many people will start to A/B test, but they're testing so often, they never see the results with it. So, make sure that you track it, so that you can actually see what is working.
Exactly. We have a lot of people who be like, it's not a good show for me. I just don't like it. We're like, why don't you like it? So having that, like you said, track it based on data, not feelings. And that's where we've had one of our wonderful client account manager, she is always like, okay, just do me a favor. This is where I see all the benefit. Give it a shot. If it doesn't work and you still are like, nope, that was a horrible interview, we'll replace it for you. Just give it a shot. Just don't go on your feelings. Look at all this data behind here. This is why it's going to be a great fit. We believe it would still help. And 9 times out of 10, they come back and they're like, that was a great interview. I loved it. And so just trusting that data and not just your feelings about a particular show or how your campaign is going or how your podcast appearances are going, I think is really important. And then, like you said, testing it, but we need to actually give it time to see those results. So if you want to, I want to go after this target, this topic is what I want to talk about and such, but then you switch it to this. Well, this is what I want to talk about now. If we haven't really been able to have those podcasts air and all that in those 83 days, like you say, and just really be able to track that, we're not going to know if it's actually getting results.
So, trust but verify, track with data. So we had set a SMART goal, track it. What's the final one for the big takeaway?
I think it's right what we said. Test it, but give time to see those results. And I will scream that from the mountaintops. We need to give it time.
And that's one of those Thomisms where it's like people will say, we should do this. And I'll always say, that's an interesting idea. We should test that, right? Does it work? I don't know, right? Test it with the market, see what it works. And that's one of the things that I love. And an example that I use, Carla Fowler, right? Smart lady, MD, PhD, right? And she would talk about all these different things. And then she would get the little clips from them and repurpose it. And she'd put it on LinkedIn and she would see which ones got the engagement, right? What did people love and what did they, I say loathe, but ignore, right? And so right with that, she was looking at the data, she was testing. I'm like, oh, this resonates. I got to do more of this. I've got to do less of this. So it's a journey. It's a process. And after 10 years, there is no doubt that podcast interview marketing works. It's just you've got to work the system.
Exactly right. Thanks for having me on, Tom. I've had such a wonderful time talking about this.
Thank you, Jessica. And I hope the listeners got insights out of this. Right. It's not about just another podcast interview. It's about getting the results, getting the impact from everyone. Wow. What an incredible conversation with Jessica Morgan. I hope you're as fired up as I am about using podcast interviews strategically to grow your brand and grow your business. Jessica really brought home the idea that success in podcasting isn't just about doing more or getting on the biggest shows that rack up some vanity metrics. Instead, it's about aligning your podcast appearances with your business goals, whether that's boosting your domain authority, enhancing your social media presence, or driving leads and sales. If you take one thing away from today's episodes, let it be this. Set clear goals before every podcast appearance. Know what success looks like for you. Then track your results with data, not just gut feelings. And give your strategy time to breathe. Podcasting is a marathon, not a sprint. And the impact can be both powerful and long lasting. So your action step for today, take a few minutes to define what podcast success looks like for you. Is it SEO growth, lead generation, building your brand authority? Once you've got that, use podcasting, use the data, use the podcast authority score to measure your progress and refine your approach. Thanks for joining us today. If you like this episode, share it with a friend. Subscribe for more insights. And as always, keep turning those listeners into leads. Until next time, keep being a great guest and make every interview count.